Hello, I'm SA, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
Philosophical revolutions sometimes announce themselves with grand manifestos, with sweeping repudiations of the past. Others begin more quietly, with a meticulous placement of symbols on a page. The revolution ignited by Ruth Barcan Marcus belongs to this second category. It began in the austere world of symbolic logic, a domain that, in the mid-1940s, was dominated by powerful orthodoxy. This was the intellectual world shaped by Quine, a philosophical environment deeply skeptical of concepts like necessity and possibility. For Quine and his many influential followers, such modal notions were relics of a confused, pre-scientific metaphysics. They were vague, obscure, and, most damningly, they seemed to resist the clarifying power of modern predicate logic, the very engine of analytical philosophy. The central dogma held that one could speak of properties that all things have using the universal quantifier, or of properties that at least one thing has using the existential quantifier. One could also, separately, entertain propositions about what was necessarily true or merely possibly true. The chasm between these two modes of discourse, the quantitative and the modal, was considered absolute and unbridgeable. To quantify into a modal context, to say, for instance, there exists something that is necessarily a prime number, was, in the Quinian view, to commit a grave philosophical error, to wander into a thicket of paradox and semantic confusion. It was an operation without a clear meaning. Into this formidable consensus stepped Ruth Barcan, a doctoral candidate at Yale University. Her dissertation, and a series of papers that emerged from it beginning in 1946, represented a direct and profound challenge to the prevailing skepticism. Her approach was characterized by a stunning formal audacity. She would build the very bridge that the era's leading thinkers had declared impossible. Her work commenced by taking the axiomatic systems for propositional modal logic developed by Lewis systems like S2 and S4 as a foundation. These systems provided rules for manipulating sentences involving operators for necessity and possibility. Her singular, revolutionary contribution was to extend these systems, to build upon them a complete functional calculus of the first order. She was creating, from the ground up, the world's first formal language for quantified modal logic. The results appeared in the pages of the Journal of Symbolic Logic a venue where precision is the only currency. Here, amidst dense lines of formal proof, she introduced the axiom that would forever bear her name and define the subsequent landscape of debate. This was the Barcan Formula. In one of its common forms, it can be stated as follows: if it is possible that there exists an object X that is the property F, then there exists an object X that possibly has the property F. Symbolically, this is expressed as the possibility of the existence of an X such that F of X implies the existence of an X such that the possibility of F of X. On the surface, this might appear as a simple, almost intuitive reordering of symbols, a logician's sleight of hand. Its implications, however, are deep and metaphysically vast. The formula provides a license, a formal rule, for moving a quantifier from inside a modal operator to the outside. In doing so, it makes a powerful claim about the nature of existence and possibility. It asserts that if a possible world contains some object with a certain feature, then that object must be available in our world, the actual world, as something that could have had that feature. The formula's consequence is a commitment to what philosophers would come to call a fixed domain of quantification. It entails that the collection of objects that exist is constant across all possible worlds. The individuals that populate our reality are the same individuals that populate all alternative scenarios. What changes from one possible world to another are the properties these individuals possess and the relations they stand into one another, while the cast of characters remains the same. An object might be blue in this world and red in another, but the object itself exists in both. This was a stark and controversial metaphysical thesis, now given voice through the rigorous language of symbolic logic. She also articulated the dual of this principle using the universal quantifier and the operator for necessity. This formulation states that if for every object X, it is necessary that X has property F, then it is a matter of necessity that every object X has property F. This parallel axiom reinforces the same underlying picture of reality. It governs the movement of the universal quantifier out of the scope of the necessity operator, again presupposing that the every object we speak of is a consistent set across all conceivable states of affairs. With these axioms, Marcus had done something remarkable. She had created a formal target. The philosophical unease about modality, once a diffuse and general skepticism, now had a specific, tangible principle to contend with. The debate was transformed. It became a debate about the coherence and consequences of accepting the Barcan Formula. Her work provided the very language and structure that her critics, including Quine himself, would need to use to articulate their objections with precision. The influence of this formal innovation radiated outward almost immediately, shaping the work of other pioneers. The logician Arthur Prior, then developing what would become tense logic, recognized the deep structural analogy. He saw that the modalities of pastness and futurity behaved much like possibility and necessity. The Barcan Formula had a temporal counterpart that raised fascinating questions. If it will be the case that a person exists who walks on Mars, does that imply that a person exists now who will one day walk on Mars? The formal apparatus Marcus had built for possibility became a powerful tool for analyzing time. Perhaps the most significant legacy of her early work was the agenda set for the next generation. A decade later, a young Saul Kripke would develop his now famous possible world semantics. This provided a powerful, intuitive model-theoretic framework for making sense of modal claims. Kripke's models, with their sets of worlds and specified domains of individuals within them, offered a way to visualize the very commitments Marcus's axioms had first articulated. Within Kripke's framework, the meaning of the Barcan Formula became transparent. A modal system validates the Barcan Formula if and only if its models feature a constant domain of individuals across all accessible worlds. A formula's acceptance or rejection became a choice about how to construct one's models of reality. Marcus had written the axiomatic score, and Kripke would later provide the most influential orchestration, demonstrating how her purely formal system corresponded to a rich and intuitive picture of worlds and individuals. This initial, formidable achievement laid the entire foundation for modern modal logic. As a graduate student, she had looked upon a philosophical chasm, and where others saw an impassable void, she constructed a bridge built from pure, formal reason. She had established the very terms of engagement for one of the most fruitful philosophical debates of the 20th century. This act of creation, however, invited a counter-response. Having been given a formal target, Quine would aim his most powerful arguments directly at it, focusing on the paradoxes of identity and reference that he believed her system inevitably produced. The stage was set for the next phase of the confrontation, a direct engagement with the problem of identity in a world of possibility. Willard Van Orman Quine's assault on quantified modal logic was as elegant as it was devastating. He presented a puzzle that appeared to expose a fundamental flaw at the heart of the enterprise, a problem of what he termed referential opacity. For Quine, modal operators lacked necessarily or possibly created linguistic contexts where the ordinary rules of reference and substitution collapsed. His critique was powerful because it was simple, relying on a set of seemingly unobjectionable premises that led to a patently false conclusion. The challenge was aimed squarely at the logical systems Marcus was pioneering, and it demanded a response of equal logical force. Quine's famous argument proceeds with disarming clarity. Consider two statements. First, the astronomical fact the number of planets is 9. This is an identity statement, equating the definite description the number of planets with the numeral 9. Second, consider a mathematical truth necessarily, 9 is greater than 7. This is a modal claim about a necessary property of the number 9. The principle of substitutivity of identicals, a cornerstone of classical logic, inherited from Leibniz, dictates that if two terms refer to the same object, one can be substituted for the other in any true sense without changing its true value. Applying this principle, one should be able to substitute the number of planets for 9 in the second statement. The result is the conclusion necessarily the number of planets is greater than 7. This conclusion is transparently false. While it is true that the number of planets is greater than 7, there is nothing necessary about it. Our solar system could easily have formed with 6 planets, or perhaps 11. The statement expresses a contingent feature of our world, a cosmic accident. For Quine, this result was a fatal paradox. The failure of substitution demonstrated that within the scope of a modal operator like necessarily, terms like 9 and the number of planets were behaving differently. They were opaque, one could see their reference. He concluded that quantifying into such contexts, making claims about what is necessarily true of asterisk objects asterisk, was a philosophically incoherent exercise, doomed to generate paradox. The very idea of essential properties, which modal logic sought to formalize, was for him a remnant of a confused Aristotelian metaphysics. Faced with this formidable objection, Ruth Barcan Marcus responded with a piece of formal reasoning of breathtaking power and simplicity. In her 1947 paper, which circulated among logicians years before its official publication, she offered a direct proof for what is now a landmark thesis in metaphysics, the necessity of identity. She met Quine's philosophical puzzle with a rigorous, formal derivation from within the very system he was attacking. Her strategy was to show that the problem lay with Quine's understanding of identity, a faulty premise in his argument, and that modal logic itself possessed the resources to diagnose the error. Her proof is a masterclass in philosophical judo, using the opponent's own weight against him. It begins with two fundamental principles. The first is Leibniz's law, specifically the principle of the indiscernibility of identicals. If an object X is identical to an object Y, then for any property P, if X has P, then Y also has P. The second premise is a trivial, almost self-evident truth of modal logic. Everything is necessarily identical to itself. For any object X, it is a necessary truth that X equals X. This property, being necessarily self-identical, is a property that every object possesses. The deduction unfolds with perfect logical inevitability. Assume that X equals Y. According to Leibniz's law, Y must have all the properties that X has. One of the properties that X possesses is the property of being necessarily identical to X. Therefore, Y must also have this property. This means that it is necessary that Y is identical to X. The argument thus yields the theorem: if X equals Y, then it is necessary that X equals Y. In symbolic form, this is the elegant expression for all X and for all Y. The statement X equals Y implies the statement necessarily X equals Y. This short, powerful proof completely reframed the debate. It functions as a diagnostic tool for evaluating identity claims. According to Marcus's derivation, any true identity statement must be asterisk necessary asterisk identity statement. With this tool in hand, we can return to Quine's puzzle. The pivotal premise with the identity claim 9 equals the number of planets. Marcus's proof forces us to ask a critical question: is this a necessary identity? The answer, as we have seen, is a resounding no. It is a contingent truth because the identity is contingent. It fails the logical test for being a genuine identity in the sense required for substitution within modal contexts. The brilliance of this move lies in its precision. Marcus showed that the failure of substitutivity in Quine's example had a clear explanation. The issue was the character of the terms involved. The numeral 9 and the definite description, the number of planets, function in profoundly different ways. The numeral, she would later argue, is a pure name, a tag for an object. The description, however, picks out an object by way of its contingent properties. Quine's error was to treat a statement of contingent coreference as if it were a statement of true metaphysical identity. The opacity he located in the modal context was actually a feature of the descriptive term he had chosen. Modal logic, or from being incoherent, was powerful enough to reveal a distinction. This formal result had immediate and lasting consequences. It became a cornerstone for the subsequent revolution in the philosophy of language and metaphysics. Saul Kripke, in his seminal 1970 lectures that became the book Naming a Necessity explicitly credits Marcus with this proof. He uses her conclusion about the necessity of identity as a crucial limmer, a foundational stepping stone for his own celebrated theory of rigid designators. Kripke's entire argument that proper names refer to the same object in all possible worlds, whereas definite descriptions can pick out different objects in different worlds, is built upon the logical bedrock that Marcus had laid decades earlier. Without her proof, Kripke's argument would lack its logical anchor. Similarly, David Kaplan's influential work on direct reference, which distinguishes the semantic content of an expression from the character that determines its content in a given context, owes a deep intellectual debt to Marcus's separation of naming from describing. She had taken what appeared to be a debilitating attack on her entire logical project and transformed it into a moment of profound clarification. Her proof vindicated the coherence of quantified modal logic by showing that it respected, and indeed illuminated, a crucial distinction between necessary and contingent truth. truths. The debate was recentered. The question was a deeper one about language and reality. Having established that true identity is always necessary, the crucial question became which terms in our language are capable of expressing such an identity. The answer would require a revolutionary rethinking of the very function of a name. The logical architecture of quantified modality, having been secured by her proof, now demanded a corresponding semantic foundation. Her vindication of the formula, the demonstration that if two things are identical, they are necessarily identical, posed a profound question that echoed through the halls of philosophy. The challenge lay in our language itself. Which words, which expressions, possess the unique power to forge such an unbreakable link of identity? Answering this required a complete reevaluation of the most fundamental linguistic act, the act of naming. This inquiry would lead Ruth Barcan Marcus to dismantle a century of philosophical tradition and erect in its place a new, startlingly direct theory of reference. The prevailing view, a powerful intellectual edifice constructed by Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell, held that a proper name was a kind of elegant shorthand. The meaning of a name, like Aristotle, was considered synonymous with a definite description or collection of descriptions, such as the student of Plato and teacher of Alexander the Great. A name, in this descriptivist framework, functioned like a compressed file, its meaning unpacked into a set of unique properties. This theory possessed a certain logical appeal, yet it encountered significant conceptual hurdles. It struggled to account for names whose associated descriptions were mistaken. Suppose Aristotle had taught someone else entirely, or for the common ability of speakers to refer successfully to individuals about whom they knew very little. Above all, it created deep paradoxes when confronted with the modal status of identity statements, the very issue Marcus's formal work had brought to the forefront. In her 1961 paper, Modalities and Intentional Languages, delivered at the Boston Colloquium for the Philosophy of Science, Marcus offered a revolutionary alternative. With characteristic intellectual courage, she proposed that proper names are mere types. This was a radical simplification with profound consequences. Her theory severed the semantic cord connecting a name to a description. The function of a name, she argued, is purely to refer. It is a label affixed directly to an object in the world. Its meaning is exhausted by its referent. The act of naming is the act of giving a tag, and the tag's sole purpose is to pick out its bearer without any intermediary conceptual baggage. This tag theory provided an astonishingly clean resolution to the puzzles that have all plagued descriptivism. Consider the paradigmatic statement, Scott is the author of Waverley. Under the old view, this was a tautology, akin to saying the author of Waverley is the author of Waverley, yet our intuition screams that it is a contingent discovery. Marcus's theory explains why. The name Scott is a tag, pointing directly and unyieldingly to the historical individual, Walter Scott. The phrase the author of Waverley is a description of something that man did. The statement is true, but it is contingent because it is easy to imagine a possible world where the very same man, Scott, chose a career in law and never penned a novel. He would still be Scott. The tag remains fixed, the properties can change. This analysis illuminates the distinction between contingent and necessary identities with surgical precision. The statement Hesperus is phosphorus represents a different kind of truth. Here, Hesperus, the name for the evening star, and phosphorus, the name for the morning star, are two distinct tags that, as astronomers discovered, are fixed to the very same object of the planet Venus. The statement expresses a necessary identity. In any possible world where Venus exists, it is self-identical. The discovery was empirical and a posteriori achievement, but the truth it uncovered is a necessary one. Marcus's framework thus accommodates the discovery of necessary truths about the world, a category of knowledge that the old descriptivist model struggled to explain. Her theory showed how language could latch onto the world with a grip so firm that it held across all possible circumstances. The development of this semantic theory was a direct and necessary outgrowth of her earlier formal proofs. Her 1947 demonstration of the necessity of identity, the formula stating that for any x and any y, if x equals y, then it is necessary that x equals y, was a logical skeleton. The tag theory of names provided the flesh and blood. The formal proof established a logical truth about identity. The semantic theory explained how our linguistic practices engage with this truth. It was a masterful synthesis, connecting the abstract power of symbolic logic to the concrete function of everyday language. She had shown that a coherent system of modal logic requires a particular kind of semantics, one where some terms confer with unwavering rigidity. The impact of this idea was seismic, setting the stage for a revolution in the philosophy of language. The full force of this revolution arrived with Saul Kripke's influential lectures in 1970, published as the classic work Naming and Necessity. Kripke's central concept of a rigid designator, a term that designates the same object in every possible world, is a powerful and systematic elaboration of Marcus's tag theory. A tag, by its very nature, functions as a rigid designator. Kripke, with characteristic scholarly integrity, explicitly acknowledged his debt, noting in his text that Marcus was the originator of the view he was defending. Her 1961 paper was a seed from which Kripke's more famous work grew. Without her initial insight, the new theory of reference would lack its foundational premise. The ripples of her work spread further. Consider Keith Donlan's crucial 1966 distinction between the attributive and referential uses of definite descriptions. Donlan argued that a phrase like the man in the corner drinking a martini could be used in two ways. Used attributively, it refers to whoever happens to fit the description. Used referentially, it aims to pick out a specific individual, say, your friend Jones, even if you're mistaken and he is actually drinking water. This referential use with a description serves as a tool to direct attention to a specific object independent of the description's accuracy, operates precisely like one of Marcus's texts. It prioritizes the act of pointing over the act of describing. Donlan's work, while focused on descriptions, reinforces the core Barcanian insight that reference can be direct and unmediated by descriptive content. Through this single, powerful idea, Ruth Barcan Marcus became a primary architect of what is now called the School of Direct Reference. This movement, which includes Kripke, Donlan, and David Kaplan, fundamentally reoriented the philosophy of language, shifting its focus away from Phrygian sense and descriptive content and toward the direct relationship between words and the world. She had taken an arcane puzzle in quantified modal logic and wielded it as a lever to topple one of the most entrenched doctrines in modern philosophy. Her work demonstrated that the most abstract logical inquiries could have profound implications for our understanding of the most basic features of human expression. Having reshaped the landscape of logic and language, she would later turn the same formidable intellectual rigor to an entirely different, yet equally complex domain, the very structure of our moral lives. The same analytical blade she had used to sever the link between between reference and description would prove equally effective in dissecting the anatomy of moral obligation. Having re-engineered the relationship between language and reality, Ruth Barcan Marcus directed her formidable intellect toward a domain saturated with human experience, yet often resistant to formal clarity ethics. She approached the field with the same impulse that guided her logical work, a desire to apply rigorous methods to problems that seemed philosophically intractable. The central puzzle that captured her attention was the status of moral dilemmas. For centuries, a powerful current in ethical thought flowing from Kantian and utilitarian headwaters alike had held that genuine moral conflicts were an illusion. Any apparent clash of duties, the prevailing view suggested, was merely a symptom of a poorly formulated moral code or a failure of rational deliberation. A truly consistent set of moral principles, it was argued, could never command an agent to perform two incompatible actions. The ethical universe in this conception was tidy, coherent, and free of tragic, irresolvable choices. Marcus found this picture of our moral lives to be profoundly inadequate. She observed that the human experience is replete with situations where every available path seems to involve some form of wrongdoing. Her project became to provide a formal philosophical foundation for the reality of these tragic choices. In her landmark 1980 paper, Moral Dilemmas and Consistency, she executed a maneuver of stunning intellectual elegance. She imported a distinction from formal logic to illuminate the structure of moral codes. The crucial insight was to separate the concept of a set of rules being ***, consistent ***, from the concept of that set being ***, co-satisfiable ***, in all possible circumstances. A set of moral rules is consistent if there is no internal logical contradiction among them. For example, the principles one ought to keep one's promises and one ought to prevent great harm, whenever possible, are perfectly consistent with each other. They can coexist peacefully within a single ethical framework. The problem, Marcus argued, arises from the contingent situations into which moral agents are thrown. While the rules themselves are consistent, the world can conspire to make them impossible to follow simultaneously. This is the condition of their failing to be co-satisfiable. The flaw resides in the state of affairs, the brute facts of the situation, rather than in the logic of the moral code. This relocation of the source of conflict was a revolutionary move. It allowed for the acknowledgement of genuine dilemmas without requiring the abandonment of a rational, principled approach to ethics. To make this abstract point tangible, consider her frequently cited example, which has become a staple of ethical pedagogy. A physician has a single, indivisible dose of a life-saving drug. Two patients, both in critical condition, will die without it. The physician is operating under at least two perfectly valid moral principles: a duty to save life where possible, and a duty to distribute scarce resources with fairness. As abstract statements, these principles are entirely consistent. Yet, in this specific, tragic circumstance, they are impossible to jointly satisfy. Giving the drug to patient A violates the duty to patient B, and vice versa. Withholding it from both, perhaps in the name of accrued fairness, it violates the duty to save life. Every action available to the physician results in a failure to fulfill a deeply held moral commitment. For Marcus, the definitive evidence for the reality of the dilemma is the emotional and psychological aftermath. The agent who makes a choice in such a situation experiences what she termed moral residue. This is the lingering sense of guilt, regret, or remorse that remains even when the agent knows they have made the best possible choice under the circumstances. If dilemmas were merely apparent, a result of faulty reasoning, then once the correct course of action was identified, any residual guilt would be irrational. The virtuous agent should, in theory, walk away with a clear conscience. Marcus contended that this psychological picture is false. The physician who saves patient A will, and perhaps should, feel a profound sense of regret for the death of patient B. This moral residue is the phenomenological trace of the genuine, unavoidable moral failure. It is the scar left by a real conflict, a testament to the fact that the agent was forced to transgress a valid moral principle. This analysis placed her in a productive dialogue with her contemporaries, particularly Bernard Williams and Thomas Nagel, who were exploring similar themes under the banner of moral luck. Williams and Nagel had powerfully argued that the contingent world could intrude upon our moral lives in ways that made our moral standing partly a matter of fortune. Marcus's contribution was to provide the formal, logical architecture that could house their phenomenological insights. She took the felt reality of tragic choices and demonstrated that it could be accommodated within a rigorous, consistent ethical framework. Her work provided the philosophical grammar for their moral poetry. The implications of this framework have been immense and continue to reverberate through contemporary ethical theory. Her paper is a canonical text in meta-ethics, a required point of engagement for anyone working on the nature of moral conflict. Philosophers like Walter Scott Armstrong have built entire theories of moral dilemmas upon the foundations she laid, and scholars such as Christopher Gowan, in his influential anthologies on the topic, place her work at the very center of a modern debate. Furthermore, her ideas have found a startlingly practical application in a field she could have scarcely imagined: the ethics of artificial intelligence. As we design autonomous systems, from self-driving cars to medical diagnostic tools, we must program their ethical decision-making protocols. The Marcusian distinction between consistency and co-satisfiability is vital. It allows for the creation of an AI that can recognize an irresolvable dilemma like the classic trolley problem and understand that the situation itself, the contingent state of the world, has created the conflict. This prevents the machine from crashing due to a perceived logical contradiction in its own code. It can proceed with the least bad option while flagging the event as one involving a genuine, unavoidable transgression, a concept essential for accountability and system improvement. In this way, her abstract analysis of moral structure provides a blueprint for the conscience of the machine. Having plumbed the depths of moral conflict, she would turn the sane analytical precision to one of the most enigmatic features of the human mind, the nature of belief itself. Having plumbed the depths of moral conflict, she would turn the sane analytical precision to one of the most enigmatic features of the human mind, the nature of belief itself. The challenge here was analogous to her work in ethics to diagnose how a rational agent could appear to hold contradictory positions without succumbing to genuine irrationality. The philosophical landscape was littered with such paradoxes, perhaps none more vexing than the puzzle solved Kripke, her intellectual heir in so many ways, had constructed. Kripke's famous thought experiment involves a perfectly rational monolingual Frenchman named Pierre. Living in France, Pierre learns of a beautiful city from picture books and comes to sincerely assent to the sentence, Londres est jolie. Later, through a twist of fate, he is moved to a rather squalid and dreary neighborhood in London. He learns English through direct immersion, without any translation, and living in his grim surroundings, he comes to sincerely assent to the sentence, London is ugly. The puzzle arises because Pierre, a rational man, now appears to believe that a single city is both pretty and ugly, a seeming violation of the law of non-contradiction. Standard accounts of belief, which treated it as a simple relation between an agent and a proposition, were thrown into disarray. This seemed to force the conclusion that Pierre was either irrational or that the very laws of logic were suspended within the domain of belief. For Marcus, this was a familiar kind of philosophical knot, one tied by failure to make the necessary distinctions. In her 1990 paper, I proposed a solution to a puzzle about belief. She brought her entire philosophical toolkit to bear on the problem. Her solution was elegant in its simplicity and profound in its implications. She proposed that we must differentiate between an agent's assent to a sentence and their belief asterisk about an object asterisk. Belief, in her view, is a complex dispositional state. It is a readiness to act and to assent under a wide range of circumstances, all centered on a particular object in the world. Applying this framework, Pierre remains a rational agent. His cognitive state is fragmented, his knowledge incomplete, yet his core rationality is intact. He is one complex, perhaps conflicted, set of dispositions toward the actual city of London. His linguistic behavior, however, is partitioned. In a context where French is operative, he is disposed to assent to Londres est jolie. In an English-speaking context, he is disposed to assent to London is ugly. A failure is epistemic. A gap in his knowledge, he is unaware that the two names, Londres and London, co-refer. The appearance of contradiction exists at the level of sentences, of linguistic tokens, while the underlying belief structure, centered on the object, remains coherent given his informational limitations. Irrationality would only enter the picture if he were to assent to the conjoined sentence, London is pretty and London is ugly, within the same linguistic and cognitive context. By separating the object of belief from the sentences used to express it, Marcus dissolves a paradox. The problem resides in the friction between language and the world, a theme that echoes throughout her career. This object-centered, dispositional account, directly influenced by her earlier work on direct reference, provided a powerful alternative to the proposition-focused models that dominated the field, demonstrating once again her capacity to find clarity through logical precision. To survey the intellectual arc of Ruth Barcan Marcus is to witness a singular, powerful philosophical vision unfolding over half a century. Her body of work constitutes a unified project dedicated to the idea that the most stubborn problems in philosophy are often confusions masquerading as paradoxes. From her earliest papers in Quantified Modal logic to her final thoughts on belief, she wielded formal methods as a clarifying agent, a tool for dissolving ambiguity and revealing the underlying structure of reality, language, and thought. Her career was a sustained argument for the power of logical rigor to achieve deep philosophical insight. The Barcan Formula, her first and most famous contribution, was the opening salvo in a revolution. It laid the axiomatic groundwork for a world where necessity and possibility could be discussed with the same precision as quantity and number. This move established the very possibility of a rigorous metaphysics of modality, a field that would come to dominate late 20th century philosophy. Her subsequent proof of the necessity of identity was a direct consequence of this new logic, a stunning result that collapsed a metaphysical question into a theorem of a formal system. In doing so, she demonstrated that some of the most profound truths about the world were accessible through the clear lens of logical analysis. These contributions were the bedrock upon which others, including Kripke and David Lewis, would build their grand metaphysical systems. They were the essential architects of the new city, yet she was the one who first surveyed the territory and laid the unshakable foundations. Her philosophical courage was inseparable from her personal circumstances. As a woman in a field overwhelmingly populated and controlled by men, she faced skepticism and marginalization that would have deterred a less resilient intellect. Her tenacity in defending her work, particularly against the colossal influence of Willard Van Orman Quine, reveals a character forged in intellectual and institutional fire. This very position, as an outsider, may have afforded her a unique vantage point, allowing her to see the weaknesses in the prevailing empiricist orthodoxy with a clarity unavailable to those comfortably within it. Her insistence on direct reference, her defense of essential properties, and her commitment to a realistic interpretation of modality were all radical departures from the Quinian consensus. Her intellectual independence was her greatest asset, allowing her to pursue a consistent and powerful vision while the philosophical mainstream was flowing in a different direction. Ultimately, her legacy is that of a philosopher's philosopher and thinker whose influence runs deeper than citation counts might suggest. She was the essential precursor, the one who made possible the work of others. Her ideas on direct reference, articulated in the 1960s, set the stage for the Kripkean revolution in the philosophy of language. Her analysis of moral dilemmas provided a formal framework for understanding ethical conflict that remains profoundly relevant. Her work on belief untangled paradoxes that had ensnared the finest minds. Ruth Barcan Marcus stands as one of the most consequential logicians and philosophers of her era. She was a pioneer who cleared the path, a rigorous thinker who demanded clarity, and an intellectual architect whose designs shaped the very structure of contemporary analytic philosophy. Her work is a testament to the enduring power of a clear-eyed and courageous mind to illuminate the deepest questions of existence.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.